Journalist shuts down Doug Ford at housing photo op as Putin stuns Trump after redo carpet. In Sarnia this week, a political event turned awkward when Premier Doug Ford was challenged by a journalist during a $400,000 housing grant announcement. Smiling for cameras, Ford framed it as a step toward affordability, but in a city where the average home costs over $550,000, the amount was barely symbolic. The reporter asked the question everyone was thinking: how can this solve the crisis when it doesn't even cover one home? The moment exposed the emptiness of the announcement and left Ford scrambling. Ford responded with cliches about supporting families and building Ontario stronger, failing to name local home prices and reverting to vague promises about jobs and investment. The mayor defended him, noting combined funding could unlock provincial money for thousands of homes, but the math didn't convince anyone. With Ontario's population growing rapidly from immigration and interprovincial migration, even promised homes over several years are a drop in the bucket. The journalist's blunt question voiced widespread frustration. This one exchange reflected a deeper frustration across Ontario. Housing starts have fallen to their lowest in a decade, down over 25% from last year, with Toronto particularly hard hit as new construction dropped nearly half. Demand continues to rise from students, workers, and incoming families, while rents climb and first-time buyers are being priced out. Ford's Sarnia announcement became a symbol of leadership failure, symbolic gestures over practical solutions. The journalist's pointed question gave voice to the anger of ordinary people who feel increasingly left behind. Prime Minister Mark Carney, months into his tenure after the April snap election, has focused on affordability. His government cut income taxes, scrapped the consumer carbon tax, and provided GST relief for first-time buyers. Carney also reduced immigration from the recent 500,000 to roughly 395,000 in 2025, while shrinking temporary resident numbers, citing strain on housing, healthcare, and services. The move reassured some Canadians, but drew criticism that it could slow growth and worsen labor shortages. Carney's approach underscores the complexity of governing amid scarcity. For Ford, however, the challenge is sharper. Once a self-styled champion of everyday Ontarians, he is now increasingly seen as aligning himself with Ottawa's agenda rather than fighting for provincial interests. His embrace of prefab housing projects and token funding packages mirrors federal policies that many view as insufficient. This perception of loyalty to Carney's Liberals undercuts Ford's claim of independence. The Sarnia confrontation highlighted this tension. A premier who once thrived on blunt talk now appears trapped in political doublespeak, relying on photo ops to mask a lack of meaningful action. Beyond housing, Ontario's economy has been rattled by external shocks. U.S. tariffs on Canadian goods have disrupted manufacturing and exports, hitting auto plants and steel industries particularly hard. Carney's government responded by rolling back many counter-tariffs to preserve trade benefits under the USMCA, while leaving some protective measures in place for key industries. For workers in Windsor, Hamilton, and Oshawa, though, the trade standoff has meant layoffs, reduced hours, and deep anxiety about the future. In this climate, Ford's announcement of a few $100,000 for housing looked not just insufficient, but disconnected from the larger struggles facing Ontario's working families. The tension in Sarnia coincided with a dramatic moment on the world stage. Seeking to project strength and diplomacy, U.S. President Donald Trump welcomed Russian President Vladimir Putin with a lavish red carpet ceremony in Alaska. The optics were intended to suggest partnership and the possibility of peace. But within hours, Putin ordered a new round of strikes against Ukraine, undercutting Trump's carefully staged moment and making him appear weak. The incident demonstrated the limits of optics in international politics. No matter how polished the image, substance, and action matter far more. For Canada, it was a sobering reminder that its voice in global affairs is small, even as the stakes, energy security, trade stability, and defense commitments grow larger. At home, opposition leader Pierre Poilievre has reemerged as a force after a by-election victory that saw him secure over 80% of the vote in his riding. His return energizes conservatives who believe Carney's government will falter under the weight of economic headwinds and affordability woes. Poilievre's sharp criticisms of housing policy, government spending, and crime resonate with a public eager for change. Yet his combative style and polarizing reputation mean his challenge to Carney is not without risk. Still, his landslide win confirms that conservative energy is far from spent and that Carney's majority must be vigilant. Behind these headlines lie the human stories driving political discontent. Families stretched thin by rising rents, young professionals unable to buy homes, parents waiting months for medical appointments, and workers anxious about job security all form the backdrop to this political drama. Food banks report record demand, and small businesses struggle to absorb higher costs. Crime rates in certain communities add another layer of anxiety, with residents feeling unprotected and unheard. The anger is not abstract, it is rooted in lived experience. That is why the reporter's question to Ford struck a chord. It reflected the frustration of people who feel leaders are more concerned with photo ops than with their daily struggles. The Ford episode is powerful because it highlights the difference between image and reality. When politicians rely on staged announcements, polished lines, and symbolic checks, they risk exposing themselves to real-world scrutiny. A single blunt question can unravel an entire narrative. For Ford, that happened in Sarnia. For Trump, it happened in Alaska. And for Carney, the test is still to come. Whether his policies will produce results fast enough to meet the rising expectations of a public that no longer has patience for delay. For Carney, the stakes are immense. His early moves have been welcomed by some as steps in the right direction, but Canadians will judge him by outcomes, not intentions. Can housing starts rebound quickly? Will rents stabilize? Can jobs lost to tariffs be replaced with new opportunities? These are the questions Canadians ask around their kitchen tables, and the answers will determine whether Carney's leadership gains credibility or falters. The journalist who shut down Ford at a housing photo op reminded Canadians of the power of truth spoken plainly. Putin's betrayal of Trump after a ceremonial welcome showed the dangers of relying on image without substance. Together, these moments underscore a growing demand for leaders who deliver more than optics. Canadians are tired of theater. They want tangible results on housing, affordability, and security. Whether Carney and his allies rise to that challenge, or whether frustration deepens into a broader reckoning, will shape the country's next chapter.